400 million miles away, an ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen is quietly tearing itself apart. There is no sound to accompany this violence, only the cold, relentless transmission of telemetry data filtering down to radio dishes in the high deserts of Earth, painting a picture of a planetary sovereign in the throes of a sudden, inexplicable metamorphosis. For 4.5 billion years, the gas giant Jupiter has operated as the mechanical anchor of our solar system. It contains more than twice the mass of all the other planets, moons, and asteroids combined. It is a world so unimaginably massive that its gravity shapes the trajectories of comets, acting as a cosmic centrifuge that sweeps the inner solar system clean of catastrophic debris. We have built our models of astrophysics around its absolute unyielding stability, resting our existential security on the assumption that the giant is eternal. We were entirely wrong. In the latest datasets beamed back from the Juno spacecraft and corroborated by deep space infrared observatories, a chilling anomaly has surfaced in the math. The internal geometry of Jupiter is shifting. Its magnetic field, an invisible leviathan extending millions of miles into the freezing vacuum and shielding its moons from solar radiation, is undergoing a structural deviation that breaks our fundamental equations of planetary fluid dynamics. The Great Red Spot, a high-pressure anticyclone that has raged for centuries and could swallow the Earth whole, is not merely shrinking. It is being violently cannibalized by a massive disruption in the surrounding zonal wind bands. Beneath the uppermost layer of ammonia ice clouds, the deeply stratified atmospheric belts are bleeding into one another, destroying the thermodynamic equilibrium that has defined the planet since Galileo first pointed his primitive lenses toward the dark. This is not a seasonal weather pattern or a superficial storm. The physics required to alter the magnetic equator of a gas giant dictate that the transformation is happening deep within its core, where pressures exceed tens of millions of times the atmospheric pressure of Earth. Down in that pitch-black abyss, where hydrogen is crushed until the electrons detach and flow freely to create a vast conductive metal, the mass distribution of the entire planet is migrating. The conservation of angular momentum is an absolute law. It demands a toll for such a massive internal shift. The orbital mechanics of the entire solar system are tethered to Jupiter's center of gravity, and that center is no longer behaving according to the strict rules of celestial mechanics we thought we understood. We are standing on the shores of an indifferent cosmic ocean, trying to read the ripples of a storm we can barely comprehend. The universe does not warn us when a paradigm is about to fracture. It simply changes the variables, leaving us to calculate the terrifying consequences of our own ignorance. If you seek the unvarnished truth in the dark, subscribe and join us on this journey. Because the architecture of our neighborhood is tied to a fragile gravitational truce, every asteroid, every comet, and every terrestrial world is locked into a delicate orbital dance dictated by the mass of Jupiter. When the heaviest piece on the board begins to alter its internal geometry, the invisible threads that bind our fragile world to the void begin to stretch, reacting to a mechanical deviation in the dark that the human mind is only just beginning to measure. To understand the magnitude of the anomaly currently rewriting the telemetry of the outer solar system, we must first dismantle the fundamental illusions that govern human intuition. We are creatures born on a rocky sphere, and our brains are hardwired to process reality through the lens of terrestrial bias. We trust the ground beneath our feet. We instinctively divide the world into solid earth, liquid oceans, and gaseous skies. We conceptualize gravity as a localized force that pulls us firmly to a predictable floor, but the universe does not care about the localized comfort of human sensory perception. The very classification we use for Jupiter, a gas giant, is a linguistic failure, a desperate attempt by human astronomers to force a terrifyingly alien environment into a familiar terrestrial category. Jupiter is not a giant ball of gas, and it possesses no surface. If you were to fall into it, there is no solid ground waiting to catch you in the dark. There is no ocean to plunge into, no dramatic splashdown where the sky ends and the sea begins. Our common sense demands a boundary, a clear physical distinction between the atmosphere and the body of the planet itself. The physics of Jupiter utterly destroys that boundary. As you descend through the ammonia clouds, the mathematical relationship between temperature, pressure, and volume begins to warp the very definition of matter. The atmosphere simply thickens, heavier and denser with every mile, until the gas transitions smoothly into a supercritical fluid. It is a state of matter that simply does not exist in our daily lives, a bizarre physical regime where gas and liquid become indistinguishable. It is an abyss where the sky becomes an ocean without ever forming a wave, a continuous gradient of crushing pressure that deepens into the darkness for tens of thousands of miles. Our failure to comprehend this scale is entirely historical. For thousands of years, humanity looked up at the wandering light in the night sky and projected our own mythological arrogance onto it, naming it after the king of the gods. It was a localized light, a point of brightness fixed to a celestial sphere that rotated predictably around the Earth. That illusion of terrestrial supremacy was violently shattered in the winter of 1610, when an Italian astronomer named Galileo Galilei pointed a primitive, leather-bound tube of curved glass toward the dark. The optics were terrible, plagued by chromatic aberration and a severely limited field of view, but the mathematics of the lenses were unforgivingly precise. Through that crude instrument, Jupiter ceased to be a point of light and became a disk. More importantly, Galileo observed 4 tiny, brilliant pinpricks of light dancing around the planet night after night, shifting positions, disappearing behind the massive sphere, and reappearing on the other side. The mathematical implication was immediate and earth-shattering. Earth was not the center of all motion. Here was an entirely separate gravitational system, a clockwork mechanism operating in the cold vacuum of space, utterly indifferent to human existence. The Medicean stars, as Galileo initially called them, proved that the universe possessed architectures of mass and orbit that dwarfed our own world. Yet, even as the geocentric model collapsed, astronomers still clung to the comforting assumption that Jupiter was simply a larger version of Earth, a solid sphere wrapped in a thick blanket of clouds. Decades later, in the late 17th century, Giovanni Cassini traced the movements of the dark bands and the swirling spots on the planet's face, utilizing telescopes of unprecedented focal length. By tracking the transit times of these features, he calculated the mathematical rotation of the giant. What the numbers revealed was impossible for a solid, rocky world. The equatorial regions of Jupiter were rotating noticeably faster than the polar regions. The mathematics of differential rotation dictated a harsh physical truth. Whatever Cassini was looking at, it was not a solid body. It was a fluid entity, spinning so violently that its immense rotational inertia caused the entire planet to bulge outward at the equator, an oblateness so severe it is visible to this day through a backyard telescope. Cassini also documented a permanent blemish in the southern hemisphere, an angry crimson eye staring back at the Earth. We call it the Great Red Spot. It is a high-pressure anticyclonic storm system, a vortex of atmospheric violence so large that you could drop 2 entire Earths into its swirling maw and still have room to spare. For over 300 years, humanity watched this storm rage, treating it as a fixed geographical feature. We mapped Jupiter's bands and zones as if they were continents and oceans, assigning them permanent latitudes, sketching them into textbooks, and assuming a thermodynamic equilibrium. We assumed that because the planet was far from the Sun, receiving only a fraction of the solar energy that Earth enjoys, its weather systems were merely residual, sluggish patterns of cold gas. That illusion was finally obliterated in the late 1970s, when the twin Voyager spacecraft utilized the gravitational slingshot of the inner planets to hurl themselves across the asteroid belt and into the Jovian system. The telemetry beamed back to the Deep Space Network was not a confirmation of our models, it was a revelation of our ignorance. Voyager's cameras and infrared spectrometers revealed an atmospheric engine of terrifying complexity and power. The winds racing across the equatorial zones were clocked at over 400 miles per hour. The swirling eddies and chaotic wakes behind the Great Red Spot were driven by turbulent mechanics that dwarfed anything simulated in the meteorological laboratories of Earth. But the most chilling data point recovered from the Voyager flybys was the thermal emission profile. The mathematics of thermal radiation showed that Jupiter was emitting nearly twice as much energy into space as it was receiving from the distant sun. The heat driving these monstrous storms, the engine powering the counter-rotating jet streams, was not coming from above, it was boiling up from below. Jupiter was generating its own immense internal heat, the slow gravitational contraction of its immense mass converting potential energy into thermal radiation, deep within a core that had been radiating energy continuously since the violent birth of the solar system. It was this realization that finally forced astrophysicists to model the true, crushing horror of the Jovian interior. To understand how the planet operates, we had to simulate an environment where the laws of chemistry are bent until they break. To prove these models, humanity built a machine designed to die in the dark. In December of 1995, the Galileo atmospheric probe detached from its mothership, slammed into the upper atmosphere of Jupiter at 100,000 miles per hour, and initiated a violent deceleration that generated a plasma wake brighter than the surface of the Sun. The probe survived the atmospheric entry, deployed its parachutes, and began to sink into the abyss. For 58 minutes, it transmitted data as it descended through the ammonia clouds, plunging into a darkness that no human eye will ever see. The telemetry it sent back painted a picture of absolute crushing hostility. The wind speeds did not decrease with depth, they accelerated, proving that the planetary weather was driven by internal heat, completely detached from solar influence. As the probe sank deeper, the pressure readings climbed exponentially. The temperature spiked and the transmission signal slowly faded, swallowed by the immense atmospheric density. The probe was not destroyed by an impact. The math indicates that long after its electronics shorted out, the titanium and beryllium chassis was simply crushed, melted, and eventually vaporized, fully assimilating into the supercritical fluid of the planet. But the Galileo probe barely scratched the surface of the nightmare. To understand the anomaly that is currently ripping through Jupiter's magnetic architecture, we must use quantum mechanics to calculate what happens tens of thousands of miles below the point where the probe was annihilated. Down in the true interior, the pressure reaches tens of millions of Earth atmospheres. The temperature rivals the surface of the Sun. Under these incomprehensible conditions, hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant element in the universe, a gas that we use to fill balloons, undergoes a violent phase transition that shatters its molecular identity. The mathematics of extreme pressure dictate that the hydrogen molecules are squeezed so tightly together that their covalent bonds break. The protons are forced into a dense, tightly packed lattice, while the electrons are violently stripped away, leaving them free to flow through the fluid. The gas becomes a metal. Jupiter is built around a churning, rotating ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen, an electrically conductive abyss that is tens of thousands of miles deep. This is the true heart of the monster. As the planet spins on its axis every 10 hours, this vast frictionless ocean of metallic fluid churns and boils, driven by the intense heat radiating from the deepest interior. The convection currents within this metallic ocean act as the largest electrical generator in the planetary system. The flow of free electrons creates a self-sustaining dynamo, an electromagnetic engine of staggering proportions. This dynamo generates the Jovian magnetic field, an invisible structure so vast and powerful that if it glowed in the night sky, it would appear several times larger than the full moon from Earth. It traps charged particles from the solar wind and the volcanic eruptions of the moon Io, accelerating them to near the speed of light and creating radiation belts so intense they will fry the unshielded electronics of any spacecraft that dares to linger. The magnetic field is the structural skeleton of the entire Jovian system, locking the massive moons into their orbits, dictating the flow of plasma, and acting as a brutal, invisible shield against the interstellar medium. It is an architecture born from the precise thermodynamic balance of the liquid metallic ocean spinning deep in the dark. For centuries, our mathematics have treated this internal dynamo as a constant, a slow, eternal engine that would outlast the human race. We calculated the orbital mechanics of the solar system, assuming that the mass distribution and the electromagnetic output of this metallic ocean were locked in a stable, predictable equilibrium. But the latest data signatures filtering through the noise of the deep space network have severed that assumption. The zonal wind measurements are failing to match the historical projections. The internal heat emission profile is fluctuating in a manner that our standard models cannot reconcile. Most terrifying of all, the magnetic field is shifting. The dynamo is changing its geometry. For the magnetic field of a gas giant to alter its fundamental structure, the immense ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen driving it must be undergoing a catastrophic realignment. The heavy elements dissolving in the core, the extreme pressure gradients, the millions of miles of highly conductive fluid, something within that pitch-black, crushing environment is fundamentally altering the mass distribution of the planet. The absolute unyielding anchor of the solar system is waking up from its mathematical equilibrium, and the sheer scale of the mechanics involved in moving that much mass is something our physics was never prepared to model. To map the shifting architecture of a world that forbids entry, humanity had to build a machine capable of surviving the most violently radioactive environment in the solar system outside of the sun itself. We called it Juno. It is not merely a probe. It is an armored vault, a spinning titanium citadel plunging through the dark. Jupiter does not just possess a magnetic field, it commands a particle accelerator of monstrous proportions. The planet strips electrons from the volcanic plumes of its tortured moon Io, trapping them in its magnetic embrace and whipping them around at near relativistic speeds. This creates a synchrotron radiation environment so absolute and unforgiving that an unshielded human passing through it would receive a lethal dose of radiation in a fraction of a second. The electronics required to measure the deep interior of the gas giant are unimaginably delicate, relying on microscopic gates of silicon that would be instantly shredded by the high-energy particles screaming through the Jovian void. To survive, Juno's vital organs were sealed inside a radiation vault with walls of solid titanium half an inch thick, and its flight path was calculated with a terrifying mathematical precision. It does not orbit Jupiter in a slow, comfortable circle. It executes a highly elliptical, screaming dive over the poles, threading the needle between the cloud tops and the deadliest radiation belts, gathering its telemetry in a frantic sprint before being hurled back out into the freezing safety of deep space. It is during these harrowing 2-hour peri-Jove passes, skimming just a few thousand miles above the swirling ammonia storms, that the true scale of the Jovian mystery is decoded. Juno does not primarily measure the deep interior by taking pictures. The visible spectrum is utterly useless when trying to peer through thousands of miles of opaque, supercritical fluid. Instead, Juno measures the abyss by feeling it. It uses the brutal, invisible force of gravity itself as a sonar. The method is an engineering triumph of staggering elegance, relying on the physics of the Doppler effect. As the spacecraft races over the planet at over 130,000 miles per hour, it continuously beams a highly focused X-band radio signal back across hundreds of millions of miles of empty space to the massive parabolic dish antennas of the deep space network on Earth. If Jupiter were a perfect uniform sphere of gas, the gravitational pull on Juno would be absolutely smooth, and the radio signal received on Earth would shift in pitch at a perfectly predictable rate as the spacecraft accelerated and decelerated along its trajectory. But Jupiter is not a uniform sphere. Its interior is a chaotic, churning hierarchy of differing densities, deep atmospheric currents, and shifting masses of metallic hydrogen. As Juno flies over a region of the planet where the internal mass is slightly denser, the localized gravity pulls the spacecraft just a fraction of a millimeter per second faster. This microscopic lurch alters the wavelength of the radio signal, beaming back to Earth by an almost imperceptible margin. It is a continuous, ghostly fluctuation in the pitch of the transmission, a signal stretched and compressed by the uneven distribution of tens of Earth masses hiding in the dark. By analyzing these microscopic frequency shifts, scientists are essentially reading the gravitational braille of a leviathan, mapping the distribution of matter all the way down to the planetary core. The gravity data transmitted during these orbital dives has systematically dismantled our entire theoretical framework of how giant planets operate. For decades, the standard astrophysical model dictated that the violent weather we observe on Jupiter, the counter-rotating jet streams, the swirling anticyclones, the massive brown and white equatorial bands, was merely a superficial phenomenon. We assumed that this atmospheric violence was confined to a shallow outer layer, perhaps a few dozen miles deep, floating atop an immense, static, frictionless ocean of pressurized hydrogen. The Juno gravimetry data completely annihilated this assumption. The gravitational variations proved that the visible bands of Jupiter are not simply clouds painting the surface of a sphere. They are the exposed tips of colossal, rotating cylinders of fluid that plunge unimaginably deep into the planet. The math reveals a terrifying mechanic. The jet streams roaring across the face of Jupiter at hundreds of miles per hour do not stop at the visible cloud deck. They extend downward, cutting through the intensifying pressure for over 1,800 miles into the abyss. Try to visualize the sheer scale of that physical reality. We are talking about a localized weather system that is deeper than the distance from the crust to the core of the Earth. These are solid, contiguous cylinders of supercritical fluid, rotating at different speeds, rubbing against one another, and generating unimaginable shear forces in the dark. The mass contained just within this moving atmospheric layer is mathematically staggering. The gravitational telemetry indicates that these deep winds are dragging roughly 3 Earth masses of material along with them. 3 entire rocky worlds ground down into a fluid state, spinning in counter-rotating bands in the upper envelope of the giant. This deep atmospheric engine completely changes the thermodynamic profile of the planet, but it is only the outer layer of the anomaly. The true mystery, the profound structural failure of our classical models, lies even deeper, at the exact center of the gravitational well. Since the dawn of planetary science, the mathematical models describing the formation of the solar system demanded that Jupiter possess a solid, compact core. The theory was elegant and logical. 4.5 billion years ago, in the swirling protoplanetary disk of dust and gas surrounding the newborn sun, a massive seed of rock and exotic ices had to coalesce first. This solid seed, perhaps 10 to 20 times the mass of the Earth, acted as the gravitational anchor, generating enough localized pull to rapidly vacuum up the surrounding hydrogen and helium gas before the solar wind could blow it away. Therefore, at the exact center of Jupiter, buried beneath tens of thousands of miles of liquid metallic hydrogen, there had to be a distinct, solid boundary, a dense sphere of heavy elements compressed under tens of millions of atmospheres of pressure, sitting quietly in the dark. The radio waves from Juno, measuring the deepest, most subtle gravitational harmonics of the planet, confirmed that this solid, compact core does not exist. Instead, the gravimetric map revealed a nightmare of fluid dynamics. The core of Jupiter is not a defined, solid object. It is fuzzy. It is diluted, spread out and expanding across an area that encompasses nearly half the planet's radius. The heavy elements, the iron, the silicates, the primordial ices that built the original planetary seed, are not sitting in a dense lump at the center. They are actively dissolving into the surrounding ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen, mixing violently through deep convection currents. The planet is fundamentally cannibalizing its own heart. The physics required to dissolve heavy, rocky elements into liquid gas are completely alien to human experience. It requires an environment where the pressure is so absolute and the temperature so unimaginably high that the chemical bonds defining solid matter are overwhelmed. But even under the crushing weight of the Jovian interior, a solid core should theoretically remain stable. For it to be this diluted, for the heavy elements to be mixed so thoroughly into the upper metallic layers, something catastrophic had to have occurred, or some exotic mechanical process is actively tearing the core apart. Astrophysicists are currently wrestling with the sheer violence of the implications. One mathematical model suggests a historical trauma of incomprehensible scale. Shortly after its formation, Jupiter may have suffered a head-on collision with an embryonic planet 10 times the mass of the Earth. A solid, rocky world, hurtling through the early solar system, impacting the young gas giant with such overwhelming kinetic energy that it penetrated the atmosphere, shattered the original primordial core, and initiated a violent mixing of heavy elements that has not yet settled after 4.5 billion years. It is a vision of planetary violence that leaves a scar in the very gravity field of the survivor. The alternative explanation is equally unsettling. It suggests that the boundary between the rocky core and the metallic hydrogen is inherently unstable. The intense heat radiating from the absolute center is creating deep convection plumes, massive upwellings of fluid that are slowly eroding the heavy elements, carrying them upward into the metallic ocean like salt dissolving in a boiling cauldron. In this scenario, the architecture of the planet is not a static relic of the early solar system. It is an active, ongoing chemical metamorphosis on a planetary scale. This dilution of the core directly impacts the most critical and mysterious structure of the entire Jovian system, the planetary dynamo. The churning, boiling ocean of metallic hydrogen is what generates the immense magnetic field, and that dynamo is acutely sensitive to the composition of the fluid. If the heavy elements from the core are migrating outward, changing the density and the electrical conductivity of the metallic ocean, the resulting magnetic field will inevitably begin to deform, and the telemetry confirms that the deformation has already begun. While the world stares at the Great Red Spot, a swirling storm of gas in the upper atmosphere, Juno's magnetometers have discovered a far more terrifying feature lurking deep below the equatorial clouds. It is invisible to the human eye, entirely undetectable by optical telescopes. It is a massive, localized anomaly in the magnetic field itself. The engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory call it the Great Blue Spot. Though there is nothing blue about it, the name merely corresponds to the false color magnetic maps where the invisible forces are charted. The Great Blue Spot is an intense concentration of magnetic flux, a localized region near the Jovian equator where the magnetic field lines plunge violently back into the planet. It is an irregularity, a severe asymmetry in an otherwise dipolar magnetic structure. On Earth, our magnetic field is relatively uniform, generated by the smooth rotation of our liquid iron core. Jupiter's magnetic field, however, is heavily lopsided, vastly stronger in the northern hemisphere than in the south, and deeply complicated by the existence of this localized equatorial anomaly. But the Great Blue Spot is not just a static geographic quirk. It is moving. It is being actively sheared apart by the physical motion of the fluid ocean beneath it. The magnetic field lines of Jupiter are generated by the metallic hydrogen, which means the magnetic field is fundamentally tied to the physical flow of the fluid. When the deep internal winds, the massive cylinders of rotating mass plunging 1,800 miles down, intersect with the highly conductive metallic ocean, they create an electromagnetic drag. The physical fluid physically pulls the magnetic field lines with it. By observing the Great Blue Spot over multiple orbits, Juno's instruments have detected a rapid, secular variation in the magnetic architecture. The anomaly is drifting eastward, but more alarmingly, the deep zonal winds are stretching the spot, tearing the magnetic flux apart at a rate of several centimeters per second. This is the intersection of fluid dynamics and electromagnetism on a scale that breaks the mind. We are witnessing the deep atmospheric weather actively destroying and reforming the planetary magnetic field in real time. The Great Blue Spot is essentially a window into the abyss, a magnetic manifestation of the violent, churning mechanics operating in a realm of absolute darkness and crushing pressure. It proves that the metallic ocean is not a uniform, frictionless sphere, but a turbulent, chaotic engine where massive internal rivers of conductive fluid are fighting against the immense rotational inertia of the planet. As the heavy elements from the eroding core continue to mix into the metallic hydrogen, and the deep winds continue to drag the magnetic field lines across the equator, the structural integrity of the dynamo is being subjected to unprecedented stress. The variables of the equation are shifting. The mass distribution is altering. The localized gravity field is fluctuating as tens of Earth masses of fluid migrate through the dark. The entire physical and electromagnetic architecture of the planet is operating in a state of asymmetric, turbulent transition, driven by an internal heat engine that is completely disconnected from the light of the sun. The colossal anchor of the solar system, the sovereign that dictates the orbital stability of the rocks we call home, is masking a mechanical instability so profound that our most advanced supercomputers struggle to model the shear forces involved. The sheer volume of metallic fluid undergoing this slow, agonizing structural realignment defies the basic mathematical parameters we have relied upon for generations. To understand the true terror of what is happening inside Jupiter, you must understand the exact point where human intelligence hits a solid, insurmountable wall. We have spent the last 4 centuries building a magnificent architecture of mathematics to explain the universe. We have mapped the trajectories of galaxies, decoded the quantum firing of individual atoms, and synchronized atomic clocks to account for the relativistic warping of time itself. We have engineered our civilization upon the absolute certainty that if you know the starting conditions of a physical system, you can use an equation to predict its future. But when astrophysicists take their most advanced mathematical models, the crown jewels of theoretical physics, and attempt to apply them to the churning metallic ocean of the Jovian interior, the equations do not merely fail. They collapse into catastrophic paradoxes. The barrier we have hit is not a lack of data. Juno is giving us the telemetry. The barrier is a fundamental flaw in the language of human mathematics when confronted with the extreme edge of fluid dynamics. If you want to understand how water flows through a pipe or how the air rushes over the wing of an airplane, you use a set of mathematical rules called the Navier-Stokes equations. They are the absolute foundation of classical fluid mechanics. They describe how the velocity, pressure, temperature, and density of a moving fluid interact over time. On Earth, they work beautifully. We use them to design weather forecasts, to build submarines, to predict the circulation of the oceans. But these equations possess a dark, unresolved secret. Even after centuries of study, mathematicians have never been able to prove that these equations will not suddenly break down and produce a singularity, a point where the math divides by 0, the numbers shoot to infinity, and physical reality, as described by the equation, simply ceases to make sense. When a fluid becomes completely chaotic, when the turbulence reaches a certain threshold of violence, the deterministic nature of the math shatters. Now take those fragile, mathematically unstable equations and sink them tens of thousands of miles into the dark of Jupiter. Down there, the fluid is not water or atmospheric gas. It is liquid metallic hydrogen. It is a fluid that conducts electricity perfectly. This introduces a terrifying complication into the math. Because the fluid is moving, it acts as a dynamo, generating the massive Jovian magnetic field. But the laws of electromagnetism dictate a brutal retaliation. The moment the magnetic field is generated, it immediately exerts a physical force, known as the Lorentz force, back upon the conductive fluid that birthed it. The fluid moves the magnetic field, and the magnetic field physically fights back, dragging, twisting, and violently reshaping the flow of the fluid. This creates an infinite, non-linear feedback loop. To calculate the future state of the fluid, you must know the exact state of the magnetic field. But to know the state of the magnetic field, you must know the exact velocity of the fluid. They are locked in a chaotic, perpetual war of cause and effect. Physicists call this realm of study magnetohydrodynamics, and it is arguably the most computationally hostile discipline in all of science. When you try to run these equations to predict the shifting mass of Jupiter, the turbulence cascades. A microscopic eddy in the metallic hydrogen creates a localized magnetic spike, which physically alters a fluid current thousands of miles away, which in turn stretches the magnetic field lines until they snap and reconnect, releasing colossal bursts of thermal energy. This is the chaotic engine tearing at the great blue spot, and our mathematics cannot keep up with the violence. The equations begin to spit out infinities. They predict physical impossibilities. The sheer turbulence of an ocean, that deep spinning that fast under the grip of its own electromagnetic retaliation, fundamentally breaks the classical laws of motion. But the paradox deepens, descending from the classical world into the bizarre, claustrophobic realm of quantum mechanics. The heat and pressure at the core of Jupiter are so extreme that they annihilate the classical laws of thermodynamics. If Jupiter were just a few dozen times more massive, that immense gravitational pressure would ignite nuclear fusion, and the planet would become a star. It did not reach that threshold. but the pressure is still strong enough to force the atoms into a state of physical paradox. In the deep interior, gravity is trying to crush the dissolved heavy elements and the metallic hydrogen into a single, infinitely dense point. What stops the planet from collapsing entirely is not the physical strength of the material, but a strict, unyielding law of quantum mechanics known as the Pauli exclusion principle. This principle states that no two electrons can occupy the exact same quantum state simultaneously. As gravity squeezes the Jovian core, the free electrons in the metallic hydrogen are packed so tightly together that they run out of available quantum real estate. They are physically backed into a corner by the laws of probability. To avoid violating the exclusion principle, the electrons begin to vibrate with immense, frantic kinetic energy, pushing back against the crushing weight of the entire planet. This phenomenon is called electron degeneracy pressure. It is the exact same quantum mechanical force that prevents dead stars, like white dwarfs, from collapsing into black holes. This is the terrifying paradox of the Jovian core. It is a fluid ocean, subject to the chaotic swirling laws of classical fluid dynamics, but it is simultaneously being held up by the rigid, probabilistic laws of quantum mechanics. Classical physics and quantum mechanics famously hate each other. They operate on entirely different mathematical frameworks that refuse to synthesize. Yet, inside Jupiter, they are forced to coexist in a single, macroscopic environment. We have a massive, spinning, turbulent fluid that is simultaneously acting as a quantum mechanical object. When astrophysicists attempt to write a single equation that accounts for both the chaotic magnetic turbulence of the classical fluid and the quantum degeneracy pressure of the electrons, the models completely disintegrate. There is no mathematical bridge between these two realities. We are trying to translate a language of fluid chaos into a language of quantum probability, and the dictionary simply does not exist. To bypass this absolute mathematical failure, human beings have turned to brute force. If we cannot write a single elegant equation to predict the shifting mass of the planet, we try to build the planet inside a machine. We use the most powerful supercomputers on Earth, colossal architectures of silicon and fiber optics, drawing enough electricity to power small cities simply to simulate a fraction of a second in the dark. The architecture of these simulations requires the scientists to divide the interior of Jupiter into a three-dimensional grid, chopping the planet into billions of tiny digital cubes, or voxels. The computer calculates the physical state of the fluid and the magnetic field inside one cube, and then calculates how that cube interacts with its neighbors. It is a digital replica of the abyss. But this is where the barrier of computational epistemology reveals itself. The dynamics of metallic hydrogen are highly sensitive to microscopic changes. To accurately simulate the magnetic turbulence, you must make the digital cubes incredibly small. You have to capture the tiny, swirling eddies of fluid that are perhaps only a few inches wide. Because in the mathematics of chaos theory, those microscopic eddies cascade and combine, eventually creating the massive, continent-sized storms that rip the magnetic field apart. If you make the grid cubes small enough to capture the true physical mechanics, the number of cubes required to fill the volume of Jupiter becomes a number so vast it mocks human comprehension. Even if you hijacked every supercomputer on the face of the Earth and linked them together into a single planetary brain, it would take them longer than the current age of the universe to calculate just 1 hour of real-time fluid dynamics inside the Jovian core. So the scientists are forced to compromise. They make the digital cubes larger. They average out the variables. They tell the computer to ignore the microscopic turbulence and only focus on the massive currents. They introduce artificial parameters, mathematical guesses, to smooth out the infinities. But the moment you compromise the resolution of the grid, the simulation ceases to be Jupiter. It becomes a sterile, low-resolution shadow of the truth. These compromised simulations run for months, crunching petabytes of data, and what they reveal is deeply unsettling. They show us that the stable, predictable Jupiter we relied upon is a mathematical illusion, an artifact of our own low-resolution models. When the supercomputers attempt to model the dissolving heavy elements migrating up from the fuzzy core, mixing with the metallic hydrogen, They depict a highly unstable thermodynamic regime. The heat trying to escape from the deep interior cannot simply radiate away. The metallic hydrogen is utterly opaque. Photons of light carrying the thermal energy cannot travel even a fraction of a millimeter before being absorbed and scattered by the dense fog of free electrons. Therefore, the planet can only cool itself through physical convection. Massive plumes of superheated fluid, containing the mass of entire terrestrial continents, must physically tear their way upward through the crushing pressure, fighting against the fierce rotational shear of the deep atmospheric winds. The simulations suggest that these convection plumes are not steady. They are violently episodic. For centuries, the heat builds up in the deep interior, trapped by layers of fluid with differing densities. The tension mounts in the dark, a localized buildup of thermal and magnetic stress that our instruments on Earth cannot perceive. And then a threshold is crossed. The density boundary ruptures, and a colossal plume of heavy, superheated metallic fluid punches upward, tearing through the magnetic field lines, permanently altering the geometry of the dynamo and shifting the center of mass of the entire planet. We cannot predict when these ruptures will occur. We cannot calculate the exact trajectory of the migrating core material. The paradox of the quantum fluid and the computational barrier of magnetohydrodynamics guarantee that we are fundamentally blind to the mechanics of the engine. We are reduced to staring at the localized magnetic anomalies, like the Great Blue Spot, watching them stretch and tear on our monitors, reading the gravitational telemetry as it confirms that millions of gigatons of mass are migrating through the abyss, and knowing with absolute certainty that the math required to understand the end result is beyond the current capacity of the human mind. The anchor of our solar system is shifting its internal architecture, and we are forced to watch from the shore, unable to read the currents, armed with broken equations and supercomputers that freeze in the face of the infinite. The geometry of the dark is changing, driven by quantum mechanical laws and fluid chaos that we cannot bridge, leading toward an inevitable thermodynamic physical consequence that we are utterly powerless to calculate. When humanity looks up at the night sky, we are comforted by the illusion of the clockwork universe. We plot the orbits of the planets with atomic precision, assuming that the solar system is a permanent, perfectly balanced mechanism. We trust that the Earth will complete its circuit around the Sun in precisely 365 days, a rhythm so reliable we have built our entire perception of time upon it. But the shifting, dissolving core of Jupiter destroys that comfort. The terrifying consequence of a massive, fluctuating fluid dynamo at the center of the outer solar system is that it fundamentally destabilizes the macroscopic architecture of everything else. To understand the threat, we must look at a mathematical nightmare known as the many-body problem. If you have a universe containing only two masses, a solitary star and a single planet, the mathematics of their orbit are pristine. They will revolve around their common center of gravity in a perfect eternal ellipse. You can calculate their positions 10 billion years into the future with absolute certainty. But the moment you introduce a third gravitational body into the equation, the pristine math shatters. The gravitational fields of the three bodies constantly pull at each other in a continuous infinite feedback loop. The math becomes nonlinear, the system becomes chaotic, and our solar system does not have three bodies, it has millions. In this chaotic gravitational dance, the Sun possesses the overwhelming majority of the mass, but Jupiter acts as the great disruptor. It is so massive that the center of gravity between the Sun and Jupiter actually lies outside the physical surface of the Sun itself. Our star wobbles because the gas giant is pulling on it. And because Jupiter is pulling on the Sun, it is pulling on the orbital trajectory of every other planet, comet, and asteroid in the system. For billions of years, the solar system has settled into a fragile dynamic equilibrium. We call these orbital resonances. The smaller bodies in the solar system have found orbital paths where the rhythmic gravitational tugs of Jupiter do not tear them apart, but rather shepherd them safely through the void. There are vast empty regions in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter known as Kirkwood gaps. These are not physical trenches, they are mathematical exclusion zones. If an asteroid drifts into one of these gaps, The gravitational resonance of Jupiter will sync up with the asteroid's orbit, delivering a periodic rhythmic pull that acts exactly like pushing a child on a swing. Over thousands of years, that rhythmic pushing amplifies the asteroid's momentum, stretching its circular orbit into a long, highly elliptical trajectory that violently crosses the path of the inner planets. Jupiter is actively sweeping these zones clear, throwing rocks into the dark. Now apply the horrifying reality of Juno's telemetry to this delicate orbital machinery. The gravitational resonance of Jupiter is entirely dependent on its mass distribution remaining static. We have calculated the safety of Earth's orbit based on the assumption that Jupiter's center of gravity is a fixed point, anchored by a solid, unchanging core. But we now know the core is fuzzy, diluted, and migrating. Millions of gigatons of heavy elements and superheated metallic hydrogen are actively churning and shifting deep within the abyss. As this mass redistributes itself, the localized gravity field of the planet subtly changes. The microscopic fluctuations in the gravitational harmonics that Juno measures are not just scientific curiosities, they are physical alterations to the anchor of the solar system. When the mass of Jupiter shifts, its gravitational pull shifts, and when its gravitational pull shifts, the Kirkwood gaps begin to move. The mathematical exclusion zones in the asteroid belt do not remain stationary. They sweep across the belt like invisible scythes. Asteroids that have orbited peacefully for 4 billion years, locked in stable, predictable paths, suddenly find themselves caught in a new migrating resonance. The shifting mass deep inside the gas giant begins to rhythmically push them, altering their trajectories, aiming millions of tons of primordial rock toward the inner solar system. This is not a catastrophe that unfolds overnight. The universe operates on scales of deep time that render human lifespans mathematically irrelevant. The consequences of Jupiter's internal metamorphosis will play out over tens of thousands, perhaps millions of years. But the trajectory is set. As the deep fluid currents tear the magnetic field apart and the core material migrates, the orbital mechanics of the Earth itself will begin to feel the strain. The gravitational tug of Jupiter is directly responsible for shaping the Milankovitch cycles, the slow rhythmic variations in the shape of Earth's orbit and the tilt of its axis. These cycles dictate the timing of our ice ages and the long-term climatic stability of our biosphere. A permanent shift in the Jovian center of mass means a permanent, unpredictable alteration to the orbital mechanics of Earth. The comforting, cyclical predictability of our seasons and our climate is built on a foundation that is currently liquefying. We are tethered to a sovereign that is slowly, irreversibly changing its physical parameters, and as it changes, it drags our world into a new, chaotic orbital regime where the historical records of planetary climate become useless for predicting the future. But the most immediate and violent consequences of this internal shift are being inflicted upon Jupiter's own massive moons. The 4 Galilean satellites, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, are locked in a brutal gravitational tug-of-war. As they orbit the giant, the immense gravity of Jupiter stretches and squeezes their solid rock and ice, a phenomenon known as tidal heating. This relentless physical friction generates so much internal heat that Io is completely covered in hyperactive volcanoes, blasting sulfur dioxide hundreds of miles into space. Europa, beneath a thick crust of fractured ice, harbors a vast globe-spanning ocean of liquid water, kept from freezing solid purely by the tidal friction generated by Jupiter's gravity. The entire potential for extraterrestrial biology in our solar system rests on the precise mathematical stability of this tidal squeezing. But the tidal friction is directly proportional to the distance and the mass distribution of the primary body. As the great blue spot is sheared apart by deep winds and the interior metallic hydrogen fluctuates, the magnetic and gravitational environment surrounding these moons is plunged into chaos. The radiation belts, heavily dictated by the internal dynamo, will sweep across new latitudes, sterilizing regions of the moons that were previously shielded. More terrifyingly, the orbital resonance between the moons themselves, the precise timing that keeps Europa from colliding with Io, is dependent on Jupiter's gravitational field remaining perfectly symmetrical. As the heavy elements dissolve from the core and create asymmetric mass concentrations within the planet, the gravitational pull on the moons becomes uneven. A slight change in the gravitational harmonics over 1 million years will either increase the tidal friction or decrease it. If the resonance shifts one way, the tidal squeezing on Europa will amplify exponentially. The internal heat will boil the subsurface ocean, cracking the ice shell entirely and venting the liquid water into the vacuum of space, where it will instantly freeze and be swept away by the solar wind, leaving behind a dead, desiccated husk. If the resonance shifts the other way, the tidal friction will fade. The internal engine of Europa will go cold. The ice shell will thicken, plunging downward until the entire ocean freezes solid, trapping any hypothetical biosphere in an eternal, lightless tomb of absolute zero. The delicate balance that allows liquid water to exist in the freezing outer solar system is being actively dismantled by the chaotic fluid dynamics churning millions of miles away in the dark. We are witnessing the slow-motion collapse of long-term causality. The human mind demands a predictable future, a universe where the laws of physics guarantee that the ground will remain beneath our feet and the planets will keep to their paths. But the shifting architecture of Jupiter proves that predictability is merely a localized illusion, a temporary truce in an inherently hostile cosmos. The mathematics of chaos theory dictate that a system as violently unstable as a churning metallic ocean cannot maintain equilibrium forever. The microscopic fluctuations in the deep interior are amplifying, translating the unseen violence of quantum degeneracy and fluid dynamics into macroscopic orbital deviations. The engine is changing its own geometry, and there is no mathematical model in existence that can tell us what the final configuration will look like. We are passengers on a rocky sphere, hurtling through the void, entirely at the mercy of an alien ocean that is actively rewriting the gravitational rules of our existence. There is no safety mechanism in celestial mechanics. The universe does not course-correct to preserve life or maintain stable orbits. It simply obeys the cold, unyielding dictates of mass and momentum. As the internal architecture of the gas giant continues to hemorrhage, diluting its heavy core and tearing its own magnetic field apart, the invisible threads of gravity that bind the solar system together will stretch, distort, and eventually snap into new, terrifying configurations. The realization dawning on planetary physicists is not just that Jupiter has changed, it is the chilling understanding that the colossal anchor in the dark is slipping and we are already caught in the slow, relentless drift. We build our monuments out of stone, titanium, and silicon, etching our existence into the crust of a fragile world, desperate to convince ourselves that we possess permanence. We measure reality in years and centuries, calibrating our entire understanding of the cosmos against the microscopic lifespan of our own biology. It is a comforting psychological shield, a necessary delusion constructed to protect the human mind from the crushing, paralyzing scale of the infinite. But the dissolving core of Jupiter strips that shield away, leaving us entirely exposed to the absolute, freezing indifference of the void. For generations, we pointed our glass lenses into the dark and convinced ourselves we were looking at a perfect, eternal clockwork. We believed that the universe was an orderly machine and that if we could simply write the correct equations, we could tame the shadows. We thought we had mapped the immutable, but the chaotic telemetry filtering down through the deep space network has proven that the immutable does not exist. The anchor of our entire gravitational neighborhood is slipping. The math is breaking down into infinite paradoxes. The sovereign Leviathan is mutating, its internal geometry shifting under the pressure of quantum and classical forces that fundamentally annihilate our perception of stability. Jupiter does not know we are here. It does not care about the supercomputers we build to simulate its churning metallic oceans, nor does it care about the fragile terrestrial rhythms of the blue sphere we call home. It is an entity governed solely by the brutal, unyielding metrics of extreme mass, thermodynamic decay, and fluid chaos. Our entire recorded history, every empire that has risen and collapsed, every philosophical breakthrough, every moment of human triumph and suffering, has transpired within a fraction of a localized rounding error in the immense timeline of the Jovian dynamo. We are not the architects of this system. We are not the masters of our own orbital destiny. We are merely temporary passengers, clinging to a thin layer of atmospheric gas on a localized speck of rock, drifting entirely at the mercy of a gravitational wake we cannot control. The shifting mass deep within the dark of the gas giant is actively rewriting the fundamental architecture of our neighborhood. We are tethered to the chaotic whims of a liquid ocean hundreds of millions of miles away. An invisible engine that is slowly, irreversibly altering the celestial mechanics that keep our world in the light. The cosmos does not broadcast its intentions, and it offers no sanctuary for the fragile. The clockwork is a lie. The giants of the dark are bleeding, shifting, and dying in the silence. We are floating through a violently unstable framework, surrounded by mechanics of incomprehensible violence, existing entirely on borrowed time. The geometry of the abyss is changing, and we are left with nothing but the terrifying realization that all we can do is stand on the shore of an indifferent cosmic ocean, in absolute silence, waiting for the current to pull us under.